which I have the pleasure to chair. We will be discussing how to measure well-being in cities and regions, and we will both present theoretical approaches, so to say, and lessons learned from practical experiences. As you know, the debate on measuring well-being has been started a few years ago, but by the convergence of three initiatives. This means possibly two things. The first one is that the times were right, as they say. The second, more malicious one, is that institutions copy each other in a way. But I think that there is more truth in the first hypothesis, and that times were ripe for trying to measure well-being in ways adding or even alternative to the traditional measures of GDP. The three initiatives were the OECD initiative on measuring the progress of societies, started by Enrico Giovannini as chief statistician in OECD in year 2003 or 4, I don't remember exactly. Then there was the European Commission initiative called Conference, called Beyond the GDP in Brussels, a couple of years later, which started a communication of the Commission and a series of programs dedicated to GDP and beyond. And then there was the initiative at the end of 2007 and during 2008, started by President Sarkozy in France, with a commission with two Nobel Prizes, Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz, plus the French economist B2C, and they published a report going in the same direction. It all started, in my opinion, from the famous paper by AISRe, which stated the so-called AISRe paradox, stating that even if GDP, per capita GDP exactly, goes on growing, other aspects of well-being, individual well-being, life satisfaction, happiness even, don't grow at the same rate. So, from this evidence, plus many other evidences being accumulated during the decades, it is to be remembered that when in 1934 Simon Kuznets presented his first account of national income to the American Senate, in his introduction, many of the criticisms to GDP as an overall measure of growth and well-being were already present. So, all this brought to a series of efforts to improve or complement or even substitute GDP as an overall measure of well-being. And it moved fundamentally in three main directions. The first one was to open up GDP by taking into consideration the distributive dimension. So, measuring the distribution of economic welfare together with averages. The capital GDP, of course, is an average, but every statistician, every student every student having studied the first year of statistics knows that along with averages there are distributions. So this was the first effort to open up GDP. The second direction recommended by the Stiglitz report, for instance, was to take into consideration stocks along with flows, because by taking into consideration stocks, you can better measure the sustainability of the growth process. And last but not least, to also take into account subjective consideration along with objective measures. So to investigate on the field what individuals perceive as to life satisfaction and other subjective measures of well-being. This has a few interesting consequences for regional scientists. And the first and more evident one is that in these recommendations there is apparently no space for spatial and territorial and regional consideration. In a way, it is appropriate to say that this new paradigm is spatial blind in the same way that the previous paradigm was. And the second consideration, and I think it is a consequence on the idea of improving GDP more than completely substituting GDP, is that this effort started completely from a national point of view, a top-down approach completely. That is because in the tradition, but also in the theoretical and methodological approach to national accounts, the measure of GDP and the system of national accounts is evidently national. So it starts from the consideration of what is happening at the level of the country, and then possibly zooming down to regions, cities, and smaller regions, and so on and so forth. This is a paradox, in my opinion, because on the other hand, the criticism to GDP very often started from the individual level. The Easterlin paradox was comparing not GDP to national happiness, but per capita GDP to life satisfaction and so on of individuals. So in a way, all the effort started from overall dimensions. So, as I said, taking into account the distribution, the phenomena to keep under observation extending from economic growth to overall quality of life, extending to the consideration of how economic growth and economic items and quality of life items are distributed among individuals, and also taking into account time. So long-term perspective along with short-term growth. While these activities were brought along, there was a growing demand for taking into account also the territory, the places. And this has been done in very different ways, without a theoretical framework. And what we will try to see today is to compare two different approaches. It will be hopefully forcing two different visions of the world, and I hope that by the end of the session we will be able to find a common ground for discussion. But so to say, there are two main starting points to be taken into account. The first starting point is a starting point which moves from the national level and try to applicate this national level to smaller realities on the territory. The idea is very close to the one of national accounts. We need to zoom down on the territories, and during the process of zooming down, of course, we will lose a part of the information, because not all the indicators that we are able to produce at the national level can be applied at the local level. The other point of view is a bottom-up approach, which in a way is more radical, and it says well-being affects first of all individuals, and then aggregations of individuals which express themselves in places. So there is no national authority which can have the exclusive right to decide along what dimensions to measure well-being in places, and taking into consideration the future to direct the lines along which places are going to evolve and develop. Of course, this is a very radical distinction, but it is useful, in my opinion, to start from there. So, in this section, we will try to have a presentation of both this point of view, and I've chosen, and that of course is my responsibility, the one I knew better in a way. One is the effort conducted by ISTAT, my institution, so to say, in order to move from BES. BES is a set of indicators to measure equitable and sustainable well-being in Italy. Marco Ricci will present this case, and now the current effort of ISTAT is to apply the BES concept to the city and region level. So this is called URBES. Of course, it's a pun on URBIS, which is the Latin name of city, and BES, which is the name of the well-being set of indicators. On the other hand, we will present the OECD effort in the same direction. It's called House Life in Your Region. I've been quoting OECD for the initiative on the progress, measuring the progress of societies. This is a, so to say, independent, can I say, in a way, an independent effort, not an application at the regional level of that paradigm, but an effort coherent with the TDPC committee to mobilize regions and cities on a common framework. Paolo Veneri will present this case. We should have had a presentation also by Yolanda Anselmo. She called me this morning saying she is blocked in Rome by a backache, colpo della strega for the Italians. And in a way it's a pity, because that was an interesting experiment going since a few years. It was also indirectly quoted by Fabrizio Barca yesterday in the first session, because it is a program giving incentives to regions to reach targets on base services like asili nido, creche, kindergartens, and so on and so forth. And the last but not least presentation will be done by Jauke van Dijk, who will present the lessons, will summarize the lessons learned by the activity, the program, ongoing program in OECD. In this room, we have as guests many persons from the regions participating in this program. They will have a meeting back-to-back to this session. So I invite them to be very active in the discussion that we will have. So we will do like this. After my long introduction, I will give the floor to Marco Ricci for his presentation. After Marco, Paolo will come on the floor, then Jauke. And this, if they are able to stay in 15-20 minutes of presentation, this will leave a lot of time to have a lively discussion on these issues. Thank you. Marco, go ahead. Thank you.